out into the street. There she saw some people and cried to them, "Look, look, the giant, the giant!" and pointed towards the form which she still saw moving slowly onwards to the city. The people looked up, but they could not see anything, and they laughed and said, "The child is mad." Then poor little Zaya was more than ever frightened, and ran down the street crying out still, "Look, look, the giant, the giant!" But no one heeded her, and all said, "The child is mad," and they went on their own ways. Then the naughty boys came around her and cried out, "Big Bird has lost her mates. She sees a bigger bird in the sky, and she wants it." And they made rhymes about her and sang them as they danced round. Zaya ran away from them, and she hurried right through the city and out into the country beyond it, for she still saw the great form before her in the air. As she went on, and got nearer and nearer to the giant, it grew a little darker. She could see only the clouds, but still there was visible the form of a giant hanging dimly in the air. A cold mist closed around her as the giant appeared to come onwards towards her. Then she thought of all the poor people in the city, and she hoped that the giant would spare them, and she knelt down before him and lifted up her hands appealingly and cried aloud, "Oh, great giant, spare them, spare them!" But the giant moved onwards, still as though he never heard. She cried aloud all the more, "Oh, great giant, spare them, spare them!" And she bowed down her head and wept, and the giant still, though very slowly, moved onwards towards the city. There was an old man not far off, standing at the door of a small house built of great stones, but the little maid saw him not. His face wore a look of fear and wonder, and when he saw the child kneel and raise her hands, he drew nigh and listened to her voice. When he heard her say, "O great giant," he murmured to himself, "It is then even as I feared. There are more giants, and truly this is another." He looked upwards, but he saw nothing, and he murmured again, "I see not, yet this child can see, and yet I feared, for something told me that there was danger. Truly, knowledge is blinder than innocence." The little maid, still not knowing there was any human being near her, cried out again, with a great cry of anguish, "Oh, do not, great giant, do them harm! If someone must suffer, let it be me. Take me. I am willing to die, but spare them, great giant, and do with me even as thou wilt." But the giant heeded not. And Noel, for he was the old man, felt his eyes fill with tears, and he said to himself, "O noble child, how brave she is! She would sacrifice herself." And coming closer to her, he put his hand upon her head. Zaya, who was again bowing her head, started and looked round when she felt the touch. However, when she saw that it was Noel, she was comforted, for she knew how wise and good he was, and felt that if any person could help her, he could. So she clung to him and hid her face in his breast, and he stroked her hair and comforted her. But still he could see nothing. The cold mist swept by, and when Zaya looked up, she saw that the giant had passed by, and was moving onwards to the city. "Come with me, my child," said the old man, and the two arose and went into the dwelling built of great stones. When Zaya entered, she started, for lo, the inside was a tomb. The old man felt her shudder, for he still held her close to him, and he said, "Weep not, little one, and fear not. This place reminds me and all who enter it that to the tomb we must all come at the last. Fear it not, for it has grown to be a cheerful home to me." Then the little maid was comforted, and began to examine all around her more closely. She saw all sorts of curious instruments, and many strange and many common herbs and simples hung to dry in bunches on the walls. The old man watched her in silence till her fear was gone, and then he said, "My child, saw you the features of the giant as he passed?" She answered, "Yes." "Can you describe his face and form to me?" he asked again. Whereupon she began to tell him all that she had seen, how the giant was so great that all the sky seemed filled, how the great arms were outspread, veiled in his robe, till far away the shroud was lost in air, how the face was that of a strong man, pitiless, yet without malice, and that the eyes were blind. The old man shuddered as he heard, for he knew that the giant was a very terrible one, and his heart wept for the doomed city where so many would perish in the midst of their sin. They determined to go forth and warn again the doomed people, and making no delay, the old man and the little maid hurried towards the city. As they left the small house, Zaya saw the giant before them, moving still towards the city. They hurried on, and when they had passed through the cold mist, Zaya looked back and saw the giant behind them. Presently they came to the city. It was a strange sight to see that old man and the little maid flying to tell the people of the terrible plague that was coming upon them. The old man's long white beard and hair and the child's golden locks were swept behind them in the wind, so quick they came. The faces of both were white as death. Behind them, seen only to the eyes of the pure-hearted little maid when she looked back, came ever onwards at slow pace the spectral giant that hung a dark shadow in the evening air. But those in the city never saw the giant, and when the old man and the little maid warned them, still they heeded not, but scoffed and jeered at them, and said, "Tush! There are no giants now!" And they went on their way, laughing and jeering. Then the old man came and stood on a raised place amongst them, on the lowest step of the great fountain, with the little maid by his side, and he spake thus: "O people, dwellers in this land, be warned in time. This pure-hearted child, round whose sweet innocence even the little birds that fear men and women gather in peace, has this night seen in the sky the form of a giant that advances ever onwards menacingly to our city. Believe, oh believe, and be warned, whilst ye may. To myself, even as to you, the sky is a blank, and yet see that I believe. For listen to me, all unknowing that another giant had invaded our land, I sat pensive in my dwelling, and, without cause or motive, there came into my heart a sudden fear for the safety of our city. I arose and looked north and south and east and west, and on high and on below, but never a sign of danger could I see. So I said to myself, mine eyes are dim with 100 years of watching and waiting, and so I cannot see. And yet, O people, dwellers in this land, though that century has dimmed mine outer eyes, still it has quickened mine inner eyes, the eyes of my soul. Again I went forth, and lo, this little maid knelt and implored a giant, unseen by me, to spare the city. But he heard her not, or, if he heard, answered her not, and she fell prone. So hither has come to warn you. Yonder, says the maid, he passes onward to the city. Oh, be warned in time!" Still the people heeded not, but they scoffed and jeered the more, and said, "Lo, the maid and the old man both are mad!" And they passed onwards to their homes, to dancing and feasting as before. Then the naughty boys came and mocked them, and said that Zaya had lost her birds, and had gone mad, and they made songs and sang them as they danced.